God's not trying to control them. God's not trying to be some horrible leader that's just making them bend to His will. No, what God is saying is that, look, this is how you live free. I'm trying to teach you how to live free and how to stay free. Hi, welcome to the broadcast. I'm Pastor Jack C. Pigeon, and I'm the senior pastor at West Houston Christian Center here in Houston, Texas. Along with my wife and my whole family, we help pastor West Houston. We've been in the West Chase area for almost 30 years, and we believe that this part of Houston God has given to us. And if you're looking for a church home, we'd love to be available to you. You can look us up on the web at westhoustanchristian.com. But we're talking about living with purpose. And this is a study that began, this is probably episode close to our 30s. But really what I've been talking about, what I've been studying, what I've been dealing with personally is to have a life with purpose is that we have to think on purpose. And I'm going to be honest with you. The last battlefield that you and I are ever going to be on spiritually is the battlefield of the mind. The Bible is very clear that we don't wrestle with flesh and blood, but with principalities and rulers of darkness in heavenly places. But our last battle, where the battles that you and I fight on a regular basis, the daily fight that you and I fight, is the battle of the mind. And so I feel the more that we're equipped, I feel that the more that we're aware. We don't talk a whole lot about this, but we have an enemy. And that enemy, he wants to subvert everything that God has ever done. The devil doesn't care if you get saved or not. But what the devil wants to do is inflict as much torment and trial and tribulation and all of these evil things so that you just barely getting through this life where you never have enough, where you're always sick, where you're always in lack. He would love to wound people all day, every day. And so what we're trying to do is unmask where our enemy, sometimes we can be dealing with an enemy and he's sitting right next to us, sitting right on our shoulder, speaking to our mind, telling us things that don't line up with the Word of God. So if you were with me the past 2 or 3 weeks, we really started talking about this thing called the high places. And what we found and what we talked about at the very beginning is that in any military conflict, the person, the entity, the army that has the high ground, they have a definite advantage in that war, which means they have a greater sight of view. They can see more than the people that are trying to come up the hill. Their weapons go farther. It's a place where you have a tactical advantage as far as the weapons that you use. We go back to the medieval times and they built castles and they built these strong high places, these strongholds, and those strongholds were there so that if you were on the height of that stronghold, one person could defend against many because you had the high ground. Nothing has really changed when it comes to the battle of our minds. Matter of fact, I found out an interesting fact when I was talking about the high places. The original high place in the Bible, and this is going back 2,500 years before Christ, was a place called Megiddo. And you've heard that name before, but Megiddo was a place, it's in Israel, and it was a place that there are some of the most famous battles in the world have been fought at this place called Megiddo. You had kings that built massive fortresses there. It was a high place over some of the major trade routes of that time. But interesting enough, Megiddo is a place that even in our future, the Battle of Armageddon takes place. And I thought it was so interesting that when you had your first real battle for the high places, they took place at Megiddo, and the end, when God deals with Satan completely, totally, and thoroughly, also takes place at Megiddo. The devil has always wanted the high places. He wanted them at the beginning, and that's where his final judgment comes at the end with the Battle of Armageddon. The devil has always wanted the high places. Let me just remind you of something, and I don't know if we talked about this in depth a lot, but if you go back to Isaiah chapter 14, and we're going to look at verses 12 through 15, I want to remind you where your enemy has come from. It says, "How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, how you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations. For you said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, I will also sit on the mount of congregation on the farthest sides of the north, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High." So there you see 100% what the Lucifer, whatever you want to call him, what he always wants. He's always looking down up at man. When God cursed him in the book of Genesis, he got down on his belly, and from now on, you're talking about the most prideful being that has ever touched the face of the earth. And now that prideful being has to look up at man's creation, and that's you and me. Let me also read to you out of the book of Ezekiel. The book of Ezekiel, and if you'll go with me to Ezekiel 28, and beginning in verse, matter of fact, let's go ahead and just start in verse 13, and we're going to read all the way through verse 17. It says, "You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald with gold. The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created." Sounds pretty good. "You were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Therefore I cast you out as a profane thing out of the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of fiery stones. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. I cast you to the ground. I laid you before kings that they might gaze at you." I want you to recognize that we have an enemy that had a place, but by their own, what the Bible says, iniquity was found in him. Iniquity means a twisting. It means a mixture. That's really, really important, what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks. That a lot of what I'm talking about when it comes to the high places, when it comes to our thinking, doesn't mean that I'm split in what I think. It means that I have a mixture of two types of thinking, and there's a difference. To be double-minded means that I don't have two separate equal thoughts about something. It means I'm just underdeveloped in one. What happened with the devil is that iniquity was found in him when the enemy took his eyes off of God and what that angel, that cherub, was created to do, and he put his eyes on himself. He saw himself in the mirror for the first time, and all of a sudden he fell in love with his own appearance, his own looks, and the minute that he did that, iniquity was put into his heart, and he began to want everything that God wanted. He wanted to ascend, he wanted to ascend, he wanted to ascend. And so there he was. Now he's knocked to earth. He's having a conversation with Adam and Eve, and lo and behold, when he tempts Eve with the fruit, whatever that fruit may be, God comes in and curses that being, serpent, and now he's on his belly. The devil has always wanted to take back the high places. The enemy has always wanted to hold a higher place. He always, whenever there's pride, whenever there's arrogance, whenever there's an abundance of those things, that is the spirit of the enemy. Now, yes, of course, Adam and Eve, when they partook of that fruit, that really was the first sin. But really, if you back it up before Adam and Eve, the first bit of iniquity that ever really touched this earth was pride. And pride is what really ultimately cost the devil. It sounded like he had a pretty good deal, but it was pride that ultimately cost him his ministry moving forward. Now, when we're talking about high places, let's look at Leviticus chapter 26, verse 30. Leviticus chapter 26 and verse 30. Now, I want you to notice, now in Leviticus, this is before Israel is moving into the promised land. You know, they have gone through the years of bondage in Egypt. Moses has led them out. They're out in the wilderness. They've done their 40 years of wandering. Entire generation has passed away. You got Joshua, you got Caleb, and you got this new generation of Israelites that are going to move into Canaan. They're going to move into this promised land. And so at the very, very beginning, God lays it out. He's so good to us. He lays it out and He says, if you'll do these do's, you're going to enjoy the blessing of the land. If you'll just follow my commandments, if you'll just do what I've commanded you to do. God's not trying to control them. God's not trying to be some horrible leader that's just making them bend to His will. No, what God is saying is that, look, this is how you live free. I'm trying to teach you how to live free and how to stay free. And the number one way for you to do that is if you'll just follow my commandments, do what I ask you to do, and do it when I ask you to do it, you're going to be blessed, and not just you. You're going to have generations. I'm going to make you so blessed that all the nations of the world will look at you and want to be just like you. And so it was very, very simple. So He gave them a listing of blessings, but He also gave a listing of cursings. And if you'll look at Leviticus chapter 26, verse 30. Now I want you to remember, this is before they took the promised land. Verse 30. I will destroy your high places, cut down your incense altars, and cast your carcasses on the lifeless forms of your idols. Before they'd even ventured into this promised land, where there were these high places, which we're going to talk about in the next week or two, He was letting them know that if you run away from me, if you go after other gods, if you serve false idols, if you offer incense on altars that are not for me, if you put any other god before me, this is what's going to happen in order for us to have restoration. We're going to have to pull down all those high places. Look, we're going to get into it in a little bit more detail, but there were just certain things. There was one place for Israel to worship God. There was no other God before Him. It's the same with us today. Your heart was created for only one person to sit on at a time. I can't have the devil, myself, and God all sit on the throne of my heart. It only occupies one. And so what God was saying is you've got to let me occupy the throne of your heart in order for you to be blessed, for your children to be blessed, and for you to see this thing to work. But what the devil knew is that if he could become a snare to Israel, if he could use these high places, if he could somehow get a mixture going, if he could somehow try and get them to serve both God and a few other little gods, that it would mess up the whole thing. It would have clogged up the whole machinery, as we would say today, the whole apparatus. And so that's what the devil did from the moment they left moved into the promised land. They were constantly, if you go through all of the history of Israel, and if you go through 1 Kings and 2 Kings and Chronicles, the kingdoms lived and died by how they treated the high places. And ladies and gentlemen, it's the exact same for us today. How we treat the high places of my mind. What am I thinking? What thoughts am I thinking? Am I thinking thoughts that are higher than the thoughts of God? Am I thinking thoughts that are full of arrogance? Do I have an inflated view of myself? Am I arrogant? Am I pride? Am I bashful? Do I use knowledge and wisdom to help people, or do I use it to be puffed up and to gain notoriety? Do I have to sit down front so that I can be seen, or am I happy sitting in the back seat? There's so many little ways that we check ourselves out to see who's occupying the throne of our heart. And so as we get into this, these high places primarily, and what the Bible talks about in Bible history, the high places were primarily used for worship of pagan gods. Worship of pagan gods. So you can see right there that God was going to have a problem. God desires the worship, the free will offering of His people. The worship of God is what He longs for from His children. He longs for worship. When we begin to worship other things, and we would say, Pastor, that was 2500 BC. We're more sophisticated than that. We're educated than that. We're not a bunch of pagans running around on a hillside, cutting ourselves and screaming to foreign gods. No. The devil has gotten much slicker with that. We go to packed stadiums with light shows and lasers and all these other types of things, and we give worship to things, and we give worship to people through our ovation, through our heart, through our soul, through our connection with them, and we don't even know we're doing it. God desires worship from a people that love Him of their own free will. And God is not going to share worship with someone else, whether that's a person, a place, a thing, a being, a deity, a piece of carved wood that someone put two eyes on and put in their house and began to worship. And so let's look at Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 23. These high places were pagan worship sites where idolaters offered sacrifices to their gods. Jeremiah 3:23 out of the New Living Translation says, "Our worship of idols on the hills and our religious orgies on the mountains are a delusion. Only in the Lord our God is the salvation of Israel." I want you to notice that what else took place on these high places, there was all kinds of sexual impurity. There was all stuff wasn't just done there, it was encouraged there. It was really the church of the soul. It was where man had no limitations. Everything was a free-for-all. There's no God in that. There's no love in that. It was a place where the lust of the flesh was made the God of that land. Hey, stick around. We've got some discussion about what I just talked about.
Hey, that was awesome. You know, I'm enjoying this discussion on the high places and all that. What do you get out of that?
I think the biggest thing that I really was enjoying was just realizing that the devil always wants to take the high places. So I have to be super careful that I don't get really easily deceived and try and put myself above God or above His way of thinking. And I just think it's super easy to get on that and to let the enemy kind of creep in and kind of change the way I'm thinking about something.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, if you think about the way society works, because we have so much focus on being the best and, you know, and making the most money and being famous and whatever it is, and we have celebrities come on and say, here's what I think about it. We're like, oh, look at them. And people want to be them because they're rich or whatever it is, right? And so it's like the devil's like up there slowly pulling you up to that high place, right?
Yeah.
Come up here with us, because then you don't have to do what God tells you to do. You can do what you want to do. Wow.
One thing when I think about that, I just realized how like slow of a process it is. It's not like one day you're just like, I'm going to be fantastic. You kind of have that thought a little bit, but it's like a really slow step. Well, little this, and finally you're up there and you don't even know how you got there.
Yeah, I was sharing with Pastor the other day, Jim Jones, famous guy that killed a lot of people with Kool-Aid and just, you know, bad scene there, right? But initially he started off as a pastor, and he was helping people on the streets and, you know, doing good things. And then he started thinking of himself as sort of an oracle of God, and then he turned to, I am God. And he actually made that statement. Oof. But it started off, and gradually, because people were like, oh, you're so great. And I think a lot of us, and not just pastors, obviously, but whatever you do, you get enough praise, and that ego starts building, and you're like, I am pretty great. And then next thing you know, you're up there looking down on people.
Yeah. I think it's so important to stay close to God, because that's kind of the only way you'll realize when you start to get prideful. Like I know growing up, I've played sports my whole life, and thankfully I've been able to be good at sports, but it's really easy to think like, oh man, maybe I can be better than that guy or be the greatest ever or something.
Right.
Always. And that way of thinking is just not good.
Yeah. And the thing that's, you know, all that is kind of ego and personality and all that stuff. But when it gets to the difficult part is when you start having an opinion that's contrary to what God says.
Yeah.
Because the Word says this is how you do it. You know, everything's about obedience. It's about if you do these things, then, you know, you'll be blessed. You'll have a blessed life and all that. And we get to a point where we have an opinion about ourselves that, you know, I think I'm above that. I don't really need to do that. That's for other people. It's kind of like speed limit. I mean, I have, you know, friends that like to drive fast, but the speed limit says 70 and they go 80. And you go, yeah, I know you like to drive fast, but that's against the law.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like that with God's Word. When He says, this is how you do this thing, it really doesn't matter what your opinion is or how good you are at it or how, you know, I've been doing this for years and I don't need that anymore. What is the rule? What has God set before us?
That's true.
Hey, we're so glad you joined us today. Man, if this was encouraging to you, if this was a blessing to you, man, comment below and let us know. And also, if there's a topic, if there's a subject, if there's something that you'd like us to talk about, put that in there too, man. You can like the channel, subscribe to the channel. We're putting out content on a regular basis, man. There's lots more where this came from. But most importantly, we want to know that we've been a blessing to you today and that you know that you're loved and that Jesus is Lord.